On that note, I would like to thank our sponsors very much for helping us with this program. And I'm going to say their names now, but you can see them on the screen. Nevamar, Pionite, and Panelam, Snyder Diamond, and Toto. We had a lot of support with this, and we really, really appreciate it. On that note, I'm going to hand it off to Jan in the Interiors Committee.
Hello, everybody. I am Jan Cannon. I'm the chair of the Interior Architecture Committee of the AIA Los Angeles chapter. I have the pleasure of welcoming you all on to this conversation about the science of color on a lovely sunny SoCal evening. Before I hand it over to Dan Nickerson to introduce Gillian Rose and Frances Anderton, I would like to thank our sponsors for their generosity that has made this event possible. We are all going through interesting times, and we appreciate all of you for sharing your time and showing your support. Special shout out to Sandra Todd. Dan Nickerson, take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name's Dan Nickerson, Social Spaces Specialist with Hayworth. I am also AIA member and committee person for this event. And at this time, I want to take a brief moment and just give you a little introduction on both of our speakers today. So today we have Gillian Rose. Jillian is a graduate of the Parsons School of Design and ran her own luxury interior design practice in New York City for 20 years. Before founding her color practice, the Science of Color, in 2008, she studied the neuroscience of color with disciples of Dr. Heinrich Frieling. Dr. Frieling had established the first Institute of Color Psychology in Germany in the 1930s, where the focus was on the study of Goethe and his color theory. Gillian Rose's practice, in addition to the luxury interior design practice, takes a primal approach to color design. The science of color began with the simple premise that everyone has a desire to feel a specific way. And today's focus is on discovering your primal color and what it takes to create a humane environment. Next, Frances Anderton. Frances Anderton covers design and architecture for KCRW public radio station in Los Angeles and online at kcrw.com/DNA. Anderton grew up in the UK and studied architecture before becoming an editor at the Architectural Review magazine, which sent her to Los Angeles to report on the new wave of West Coast design. She moved to LA in 1991 and served for several years as the West Coast design correspondent for the New York Times and then Dwell magazine. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take this moment and introduce you to Gillian Rose and Frances Anderton.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, I'm just getting this screen set up. Thank you, welcome all. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, the AIA, for giving us this wonderful platform. And thank you, Frances, for accepting my invitation to join us today. So we're here to talk about color in the built environment, how and why we respond, and particularly to create humane environments. But I would like to take a moment, if I may, and sort of acknowledge where we are exactly today and what's going on outside of our door. So as I think about talking about humane environments, I can't help but thinking about where we are currently. And also another aspect of color that we're not necessarily talking about today, but is about how we are categorized by color, by our hair color, by our eye color, by our skin color. And I just would like to take a moment of reflection and think about how this is a time for peace and compassion. We all bleed the same color. So now we can go to color in the built environment. So all of you who have joined today have seen this image because it was on our invitation. And I selected this image because I think it really synthesizes architecture and color. You don't see it as separate in this project. And really, if Niedermeyer had selected gray for this path, would we really be talking about it today? In culling through my images, I see that I had captured this, it looks like about 3 years ago, and it's Louis Vuitton's fashion show using this iconic building. I'm going to start with a quote. Who told you that one paints with colors? One makes use of colors, but one paints with emotion. Jean Corot, I don't know how many of you know who he is, but he was the finance minister of France in the 1800s. A real Renaissance man. He was the one that had Vaux-le-Vicomte designed for him, and that's the palace in which Versailles was based on afterwards. So these are the elements of color that we're really going to talk about today. Our primal responses to color, which really is about what colors we're drawn to for the sheer purpose of making us feel calm. We're going to look at what color is, because it's a lot of different things, and how we respond to color, and then why, and why it matters. So the first important thing to do here is to locate ourselves. So in talking about color, I'd like to ask all of you to close your eyes. Close your eyes and think about your favorite color. If you don't have one, make it up. Let it enter through the crown of your head, pass down your shoulders, your torso, your legs, and culminate as a puddle around your feet. Okay, open your eyes. Did anyone have an actual tangible image that they were looking at through this process? No. This, my friends, is the power of color. Color is within. There's a part of our brain, it's called the hippocampus, and it remembers every color you've ever seen, which is why you're able to recall this color. So when we're busily working for our clients, as all of us are architects or designers, the most important thing for us is to locate ourselves. Where are we? What are our primal colors? What are our prejudices? What are our biases? Again, I'm speaking of color strictly. So I have one more exercise for us, and I'm going to ask each of you to look at one of these 15 images, or you could look at all of the images, but select one image. I'll give you a little bit more direction. If you're picture yourself sitting in a room on a sofa against a wall and looking at the opposite wall. Now the opposite wall is going to be one of these images, and please do your best to pick one. And so you're going to be immersed in this particular image. We'll give you a moment to do that. Was anybody surprised to see where they landed? This is giving you a lot of information. It's telling you your primal color. Might not necessarily be your favorite color. When you think about when we were taught about color and asked to select our favorite colors, it was really about an object. And I know for myself, my favorite color is emerald green. Well, that's great, and it looks fabulous on my hand, but I couldn't really sit in an emerald green room. So when we're talking about architecture and the built environment and color, we're talking about something that's all of a sudden larger than we are, not smaller than we are. And that's a whole different approach to studying what the color palette should be. Primal responses. So we touched on that just now a little bit, and you could see the sole purpose for identifying our primal colors those are the colors or color that makes us feel the calmest. It puts us at ease. And this is a biological response. This is built into our DNA. It's not learned, and it will never change. So since we're talking about spaces and environments, I'm going to show you 8 slides coming up, and each one was geared for a different primal color, primal response, based on how much stimuli somebody needed. So please take a look at these. So this first one is Deanna Vreeland's living room. And I don't know who all is on this call, because I can't see most people. So I don't know if you're my peer or not, but if you are, you would know Deanna Vreeland, and you'd know about this red room. She is quite infamous in that she was the person, she started at Vogue as an editor, and she was the person that started the costume exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which now, as we know, has the Met Gala ball. That was all Deanna Vreeland's vision. And she was working with her decorator, Billy Baldwin, of course, and she told him that she loved Matisse's painting called The Red Room, and she wanted that to be the inspiration for her living room. So I think he did a pretty great job. And then on the other side is an illustration by one of the greatest illustrators we've had, and we lost him a couple years ago, Jeremiah Goodman. And what I find so fascinating about this is in his rendition, he's taken out the contrast, he's dulled down the white, and he's made it softer because that's what he needed. So take a look at the next image. So this is the power room, and it is. And this is Monsieur Despont, Perry Despont. And when he hired me after 3 months of courting me in fancy restaurants, we finally ended up in this office of his. And believe me, it's as intimidating as it looks and as intimidating as it was intended to be. Here's a space in Bra outside of Milan, and it's about the architecture and very little color. There's just tonal color. So maybe this is something that you would find more comfortable. Here's another project which I found fascinating because this client did not want any color, which is fine as long as you hit sort of the highs and lows and have a variety. Just like cooking, variety is the spice of life. And so I was able to make this come alive without using really much color. Here's another space that you might prefer to be in. This is a theater in the Netherlands. And then this is a project I did with Raphael Vignoli, one of many. And this is a Nasher Art Gallery. And of course, as you can see, the ceiling structure was a star here. So that took quite a bit of work to figure out what colors would support the ceiling and create humane environments in which people to be comfortable with and know or have some inkling as to what kind of space they're looking into based on the color. Here, you may think of this at first glance as an all green room, but take a look a little bit further. There's a lot of peach and beiges with peach undertones that are really complementing this green, because if everything was really green in this room, you wouldn't be able to stay in it. And then how can we talk about color without Farrakhan? Sorry. And one of the many things I love about this image is that it was done in 1955. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is creating humane environments that support health and wellness. And the way we do that is through intentional color. The other value add to intentional color, as we see here, is it becomes timeless. You don't have to redo a project every 5 or 10 years based on the color. It's not about trend. It's not about fashion. It's about the intention of who is going to be in the space and the architecture. So now we're going to poll and have, did you ask the question about which image people would rather be in?
No, I will start that poll right now.
Okay.
Okay, so we have about 118 people on this. So if everyone sees the poll, we'll just keep it open until we get about 75%, and I'll do a
Great.
countdown.
Okay, so should I move on?
No, I would just wait until.
Okay.
Someone is asking if you can show some of the images again. So are you able to go back?
Yes,
Jillian?
I hope so, in theory. All right. But I see the pop-up of the questions
Mhm.
on my screen. Is that what everyone else is going to see as
Yes.
well?
Yep. And they're going to vote. So is this the
Okay.
first one, Color Me
Okay.
Red?
This is Diana Vreeland's face. This is Monsieur Despont. The Power Room. This is Serenity, the lovely little house in bra. This is Tonal Piece, client that didn't want any color. This is Pop Art, very graphic. This is the Nasher Art Gallery, where the ceiling structure had to be the star. This is Princess by Night, the seemingly green room. And Barrack and Love.
All right, so all the votes are coming in. We're about 69%. So I'm going to close the poll in 5 seconds. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, and we'll share the results.
Great.
Do you see that?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Wow. So Berrigan for the win. Isn't that interesting? I love these studies and learning more about how and why people make these selections. So that was interesting.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
There we go.
So should I move on?
Yep.
So now we're going to do sort of a little color quiz. And this is really about seeing how many shades that you see, because everybody sees, or most people see, different amounts of color. And we're going to explore that a little bit. So here's a color scale. And don't worry, this is a grayscale. So now I'm going to move to the color. And see what you can do and see how many distinct hues you see when you look at this image.
Do you want me to launch that second question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so everyone should see the second poll. How many colors do you see? And we'll keep it up for just a little bit.
Okay.
All right. I think we should close it because I think people are counting too much. What do you think, Jillian? We're
Okay.
at about 60%. So I'll close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right.
That's great. So the majority of you, the number of colors is 43. So we can account for some of the distortion. The people that saw over 43 is by looking at it through a screen in the distorted light. But the people that saw less than 43 gives you an indication that you don't see as many colors as other people may. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and this is where we sort of get into some fun here. So this is a red scale, obviously, but what's really fascinating about this, and where it really begins to just make a difference between what men and women see here, is that color, our color memory and our color vision is it's in our DNA, and it comes to us specifically from our mothers. It's transferred through the X chromosome. Now, some of you may have done the genealogy kit 23andMe. Well, that's because it's the 23rd chromosome, which is the sex chromosome, which is where this information lays. Our memory lays on that, and our color senses, our color sight and responses, or not our sight, our color, well, our sight as well. Our color responses are on that X chromosome. So this is why typically women will see many more shades than men do. And what's interesting is, while I'm sure he didn't have the science behind it, remember our Tiffany, when the Tiffany glass lamps, he understood that women were able to see colors a larger variety of colors than men were. And so he only hired teenage girls to make those lamps. So where the sort of color blindness, if you will, comes in is that women see many more of the red-orange values than men do. So men will often see like a high, a medium, and a dark, and maybe an extra dark. But they won't be able to see, for the most part, I don't say everyone, but for the most part, they won't be able to see all the colors. And in this case, there are 15. So now we're going to go on to what is color. And it's as simple and complicated as that sentence is. Color is energy. It's vibration. I don't know if you remember in the 6th grade learning about wavelengths, which for me, I had no idea how they could relate to the beautiful colors I saw. But now I do, because really what we're responding to is the vibration and the energy of these wavelengths per specific color. So this is our universe. There's nothing in our world that doesn't vibrate, nothing. And that's what we're responding to, whether it's sight or sound or scent or touch, all of those things. I'm going to take a look here that all of our senses are stimulated through vibration. And really, aside from music, we don't know very much about how these others work. How we see. So there's a theory of emotion. I think in fairness, I'll say that there's decidedly considered 4 theories of emotion. But this is the one that we believe in and what we practice with. And I'm going to do my best to describe it visually, because when I studied color science, it was, all text and tables and German, and it was as dry as you possibly could even imagine, that it hurt my hair. And I was like, what am I doing? Why am I putting myself through this? And then all of a sudden it dawned on me that color is about evolution and humanity. And that's what I am about and what I practice with whoever I can. So I'm going to try and describe this a little bit more than what you see. So the event, in this case, we're going to call is the color. So I don't know if you can see this. Am I full screen or part screen, or where am I?
So that's a good point. It's really up to the viewer. So if the best viewing option, just to remind people, since I think most people are on now, the best viewing option is to go up to your view options and go to split screen and have speaker view. So then you should see the presentation on one side and Jillian on the other.
Okay, so thank you, Corinne. So here's our event. I'm trying to get it in the screen. Color's our event, any color, anytime. So this happens, and then the first thing that happens, I'm trying to get my hand in the screen, is we have a physiological response. So there's a part of our brain, it's called the hypothalamus. And what it's doing is telling our cerebral cortex, informing our cerebral cortex, first of all, whether we want to be near that color or whether we want to be away from that color. And it's also instilling any kind of physiological response that we have to seeing that color. So then here, this is where I wish I had a third hand, and I'm too dyslexic to figure out where to put it. So imagine there's a third hand, and that's the emotion. So the event happens, then the physiological response, which informs the emotion, and then that informs our cerebral cortex and tells us how we feel, both physically and emotionally, about what we're experiencing with a color. So I'm going to go one step further and try and expand on that. So we're looking at this image. It's warm and fuzzy. In this case, our little kitty cat is the event in the boot. And then our physiological response is, okay, we're looking at this image. There's nothing harmful about it. It's not alerting us to anything. We're fine. And then it's then informing our emotional response, which in this case is awe. Isn't that sweet? So that's my best attempt at sort of explaining the theory of emotion. And this happens to us all the time, anytime. Here we go. It's the same image, but now our cognition has to get impacted here, and it's telling us to tease apart what we're really seeing because it doesn't make sense to us. And that's what happens when you create colored environments that don't make sense. Our physiological responses get slowed down until we can figure out what's happening. How we see neurologically. So this is an image that my mentor, Frank Manka, designed, and I think it sort of really explains the story to us. So these are 6 interrelated factors that happen to us at any time we see any color. For a lot, not just color, but for today, we're talking about color. So our first response, as we just talked about with the theory of emotion, is our biological, our physiological response. So this is where our hypothalamus is telling our cerebral cortex, yes, I want to be near that color, or no, get me away from that color. The next step that happens to us is our instincts kick in. And then the next step after that is our conscious symbolism. And at this point, this is where the cognition starts. But before this point, these other 2 experiences are reflexes. They're not cognitive at all, but they're informing us much greater than the cognitive ones. So conscious symbolism associations are things like we learn that stop signs are red, and one of the reasons, or the main reason stop signs are red, is because it has the longest wavelength, so we will see that color from the farthest away. And the next factor are trends in fashion and media. And I find this so fascinating because remember our hippocampus, the one we use to recall our favorite color, the one that remembers every color we've ever seen? Well, that is why color marketing works. It's a very effective tool for selling product. It's not necessarily an effective tool for designing environments. So what happens when you have something like color of the year, and this year it's a blue, is that we end up seeing that color thousands of times a day. So what happens is our hippocampus gets filled, our recent memory gets filled with that color. And so we begin to feel an affinity for that color more than we actually like it. And then the last, which amuses me no end, is our personal relationship. So when we say, oh, I like that color, or I don't like that color, these 5 other interrelated factors have already happened to us in order for us to utter that sentence. Yet, for most of us, we have no idea that that's what's going on. Why are we drawn to specific colors? This is where it gets really interesting. So remember when I talked about how Our responses to color come in our inner DNA and are passed down chromosome number 23. Okay, well, one of the things in chromosome number 23 that also happens is our temperament. That's where our temperament is. And temperament, when we talk about temperament in neuropsychological terms, we're referring specifically to how much stimuli you require, you personally, how much stimuli you personally require in order to feel calm and balanced. Because that's what this is all about, creating personal harmony and balance, because that's how we all are our best. So people fall into a few different camps, but two majority camps. And neuroscientists use the term introvert and extrovert, just as psychologists do. However, when psychologists are referring to introvert and extrovert, they're referring to our personality. And that grows and develops over time. It's not stagnant. Our temperament, which is not about our personality, it's about how much stimuli we require to feel calm, is fixed and it never changes. So here's a spectrum, just like a lot of different spectrums. And I believe it was also Harvard in the 1920s established that we have a third category, ambivert, which is where sometimes you need more stimuli to feel calm and others you need less. And then we have all the ones in between. So this is really, really important. One, when we're designing our own spaces and private spaces for our clients, but it becomes really significant when we're designing public spaces, spaces where lots of different people come, and we need to be able to have everybody, as much as we can, feel at ease and function at their highest level to do whatever the intention is for them to do. So here is why it matters in the built environment in particularly. So I talk about intentional color. And what I mean by intentional color is when we're creating, through a whole series of analysis, a palette based on all the programmatic requirements of the space, but more importantly, who's going to be in that space? Are there lots of people? Or you're trying to make something appealing to many, many people, which any public building, that should be their goal. But often when you go into a public building, it's either very strongly colored or it's in tonal shades. It's one or the other. It's rarely both. And given that we have introverts and extroverts who need different amounts of stimuli, and the extroverts do need more color and more contrast in order to feel calm, and the introverts do need less color and less contrast to feel calm, it's really important when creating these, what I could term humane environments, is to create environments where everybody is going to have a place where they feel like they can breathe and think and function. And that's the importance of intentional color. So let's look at some projects. So this is a brilliant project. This is in Tasmania. And the project and the execution of the project, which it's still in phases, I think it's up to phase 2 at this point. The concept is just as brilliant as the execution. So this is a park, I believe it's about 27 acres. And its intention was to create a celebratory space to celebrate 500 years of Muslim and Aboriginal artisans collaborating together. So it's just awesome in its concept. But what Room 11 did was really brilliant. Take a look. So here we are, we have the glass, and seeing colored glass is not as strong as seeing a colored pigment. But take a look at this. This is the rest of the space. So how brilliant is this? So you have your space, for whoever needs that dose of color for however long. Some people need it for a short amount of time. Some people need it for a long amount of time. And then you have people that don't need that much color to feel calm. In fact, it's agitating and disconcerting. And so I think that room 11 has done a brilliant job of marrying the two. Here's another brilliant architect. But look at this space now through the lens of color. If the furnishings had been boldly colored, you would feel like this ceiling was going to fall on you. But they really knew what they were doing in making something this heavy and intense and overbearing not feel that way, all through color. Here's another fabulous architect. This is in Barcelona, and this is an office structure. They tell us to not call it a tower. And the concept was over geysers in the mountains. But they didn't have other architecture to compete with. They really had the sky, so they could have had the luxury to really be a lot more bold than you could be if it was surrounded in one of our urban cities. Here's a project, another project that I did with Raphael Vignoli. And take a look at this, if you will, because obviously we had to meet programmatic requirements, like how many seats it had to fill and what the acoustics were and what, but really what you want in an auditorium is you want people to retain what you're saying to them. In order to do that, you have to create an environment that is stimulating enough for them to stay focused and really pay attention and absorb what you're talking about. This is another one of my alumni, KPF. And what I love about this picture is that they've used materiality for their color, not pigment. And I often get asked if we respond to color and materiality versus color and pigment any differently, and we do not. We respond the same. So this is a project in the Netherlands, and you might be aghast when you first take a look at this, but what if I were to tell you it's a theater? And so what does that, it changes the intention of the building. And so this now becomes a building where you're not going to that often, and you're probably going in the evening. But what it's doing is it's energizing you and preparing you for what's about to happen on the inside. This is the perfect concept for anyone in retail. If you disorient people, and I mean by challenging their understanding of the ceiling and the wall and the floor, you've disoriented them, as you see in this picture. All of a sudden, their rationale goes out the window, and they become malleable. And so the normal things that are in place to have them be very cautious get thrown out of the window, no pun intended, just because you've challenged their understanding of space. Christo, we lost him this week, very, very sad. But who else created spaces that were for the sheer pleasure of color? How wonderful is that? He understood color, and he understood how much we need color, but in a very specific way. This Aros Museum in Denmark, I'd like to show because conversations I've been having lately are gravitate towards color and light, colored glass and light. And there's a place for that, certainly. But one thing to notice about this particular structure is the museum is the entire building. What you see here, this sort of rainbow circle, is merely a walkway. It's to be experiential. It's not to show artwork. It's not a space that you're going to stay in for any length of time. because when we see color through colored light, it changes the function of how we experience it. It bypasses all our normal channels. Where when I was mentioning the hypothalamus, this goes directly to our pituitary gland. So it disorientates us, and it liberates us in a way because our normal references are distorted. And this is one of the many reasons why rock concerts have always employed colored light with their music, because they're trying to take you on a journey, and they do. This is probably one of the most brilliant uses of color I've ever seen. There's not a lot of color, but wherever it is, that's all you need. Do you need more than that? The key places you need to know about, you do merely by the color. I like to show this image because it shows that color is not formulaic. Same colors, different distribution, and different intention. What's amusing to me about this is that this is a chair company's ad, and I'd be curious both as to how many they sell, and I might not want to work with those people. I'd be afraid. So this is what happens. This is our primal responses to stimuli. Some of us need more stimulating environments, and some need less. People will be comfortable or agitated in spaces that conflict with their primal needs. It's really simple. Humane environments. That's what we strive for. So this is a case study, another project I did with Raphael Vignoli. And this is the Boston Convention Center. And Raphael is a genius, and it was a dream to work on one of his projects. So this is pure Raphael. He just does look a little doodah. And it seems like there isn't a whole lot behind it because of the speed, but you know there's a lot behind it. So as most public spaces, this was a convention center, it's political. So in this case, we had to clear 60 acres of land, mostly slum land, in order to create the structure. And so we really had to make it prove its validity. Here you see a glimpse of the structure. It's 2 million square feet. Yes, 2 million square feet. Again, it's as intimidating as you think it is. If this building had stood end to end, it would be 43 stories tall. And look, it's poetry in motion. It's just a beautiful elevation. It doesn't get any better than that. And this is the concept. But if you'll take a look, it's all white. And the client did have a reaction and said, no, our 2 million square foot building cannot be all white. And so they directed Raphael to bring in an interior designer. And so I was brought into this project about 5 years before I studied color science. It's just color is how I think. Color is how I organize. I respond to the energy of color. I respond to people's energy. I'm pretty good at reading what they're going to need in order for them to feel balanced. So here, day one, I get handed 400 sheets of this. And I've never done 2 million square feet before. The largest project I'd worked on before was with Combe Pedersen Fox, and it was the Museum of Modern Art, and it was 650 square feet. So I knew I could comprehend that. So, but I knew that I had to come up with a concept right away. So I thought about, well, what is Massachusetts known for? What is Boston known for? They're known for foliage. At least on the East Coast, many people make that trip up the coast as the changing of the leaves occurs because it's spectacular. So I knew that's what I needed to make sense out of this building. So I found this image. It was actually taken by one of the architects on our team at the time. And this became my concept. So I organized one side of the building in the fall colors, and I organized the other in the spring colors, and I made the lobby the ocean. So this is what I did with that. This is 2 million square feet of space. And also it then worked its way into wayfinding. And what's really important when you're in any building, but certainly a building of this size, and these corridors were, I think, 2,000 feet long, you have to be able to locate yourself. Because if you are lost, you're not going to be able to focus on the mundane things like where are your keys, or where are you going, or where did you park your car, let alone whatever information you're supposed to retain when you're in one of these spaces in a convention center. Then we had, on the third story, there was only one space. It was the ballroom, and it was 40,000 square feet. And at this point, I think it was the largest private ballroom on the Northeast. And then I thought about, well, what's the intention of a ballroom? It's fundraising, pure and simple. That is the function of a ballroom. Why are they all so hideous? So that, I didn't want that for what we were doing. So I wanted to create an environment that was sensual and exciting, where people were going to have fun and hopefully become generous and contribute to whatever the cause was that they were brought there for. So here is a mock-up for the lobby. Remember I'd said how I wanted the lobby to represent the ocean and the sky, and this is really significant, and why I'm showing it to you is that when you're going to be bold with color, and I don't just mean using bold color, but bold with color, as I am, you have to do a mock-up. So this mock-up happened, and the second I got there, I realized this is hideous. This does not work. So down comes the blue. And we kept the blue on the floor. And you can see here, I created 6 different colors of greens and blues in the terrazzo. And this became our ocean and welcoming and the entrance of the convention center. And you can see the exhibition hall below. But yet I still had the rest of the building to contend with. And if you'll remember, the exterior of the building has a glass perimeter. So light is flowing in consistently. So whatever the interior perimeter of the space is, had to hold its own. It couldn't just be paint. So I decided to I created a textile. And I wanted it to be a tapestry because I wanted the different depths and shadows of the warp and the weft. But I didn't want to be any kind of recognizable pattern, but I knew it had to be a tapestry. And so I decided, in keeping with the color palette of the foliage of Massachusetts, I decided on the colors of the sun for my interior perimeter walls. And I went from sunrise to sunset. And you can see this is how they turned out. And take a look at all these different portals and columns and every single architectural structure here, which are all beautiful. But you wouldn't have noticed them if they were all white. They needed to be articulated. And it's why it's so important to use color. And again, tonal, it doesn't have to be birthday party colors, but tonal color to carve out humane spaces so that we feel comfortable in these spaces and we are not swallowed up. You can see the architecture is just brilliant, but the color was always about supporting the architecture, never detracting from it. And then we had these respite areas that had very little color because sometimes you just have to breathe. And you can see here the exterior perimeter wall is all being glass. And then of course the color palette, we then worked it into wayfinding. And here we're down to the reds, so it's getting close to sunset. And then our final color, which is really the color that the sky turns as the sun is disappearing below the horizon. And here is our ballroom, looking mighty sensual and raising a lot of money. One is not exclusive of the other, or doesn't have to be. And here's the final product, a place you want to go to. And isn't that what we just strive for in any of our projects? Yes, we want to meet programmatic requirements. We want to make our clients happy, but we also wanted a place, we want to create a place where you want to go, you want to be in, because it's supporting who you are. Intentional color promotes health, wellness within the built environment. So one thing I'm going to sort of backtrack and touch on is we talked about, or Dan mentioned Goethe early on in his introduction of me, and I didn't really get a chance to delve into Goethe's beliefs and who we studied and who I consider a disciple of. So Goethe, he was the first person to establish that we have an emotional response to color. And that, I think he wrote that book in 1817, and it was earth-shattering then, and I think a little bit still, but it was actually his predecessors and the research that we're continuing to do, because research in this field is on fire right now, is, as you saw by Cannon-Bard's theory of emotion, that not only do we have an emotional response to color, that we have a physiological, biological, if you will, response to color. So all these things are happening to us. And then we have to throw in our primal responses to color. What do we need? So it's a lot of balls in the air, but if you approach it analytically and humanely, you can create humane environments where people want to be. When you don't, this is what happens. Unbalanced color equals sensory deprivation. So these are some of the things we talk about or mean when we talk about physiological responses. Concentration deteriorates, attention fluctuates, we become overly emotional, lapses of perception fade, and we have unexplained headaches and nausea. All of this is not emotional, this is not cognitive, this is physiological. All of this happens to us without our even realizing it when we don't create humane environments. Our surroundings have a profound effect on our sense of well-being. Intentional color palettes are essential for restoring harmony and balance within. I have many, but this is one of my favorite color quotes. Color is democratic. It should not be a luxury. It should be like water and air. Let us go in peace, all of us. I had one question. I didn't put the slide up. The polling question about what you know now or what you've learned today. What would you want to do most about color? Would you like to discover your primal colors? Do you have a project where intentional palettes will promote your vision of health and wellness? Or do you have an investment property that could reap a greater ROI? Love to know your thoughts.
Thank you, Jillian. We do have Frances here unmuted as well.
Great. Hi.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Is the video going? Hang on a sec.
It is.
Oh, it is. Oh,
Yep.
I can't see myself.
I don't see Frances.
And I don't see me. I see you, Corinne.
It's very hard when someone is sharing their screen. It's hard to see other people, and I know it's also hard with the way you're viewing it as well. I'm going to end this poll.
Oh, Anne can see me. Hello, Anne. Hello, Jillian.
Hello, Frances. Thank you for being here.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. It was a fascinating presentation.
Why, thank you.
Did you get the answers for the last poll?
I'm going to share them right now.
Oh, that's interesting. Nobody picked the investment property.
Well, I think it takes time to realize how this really impacts. So I think it was called a slow burn. But this is great. Thank you all.
Yeah, really super interesting. So, well, I feel a little, I'm not sure if anyone can, well, rather, I'm told that people can see me, but I can't see people back, but I can just about see you, Jillian, postage stamp size. Okay. It's really fun to be part of this. I have the honor of asking you a few questions, but I know there was a lot of questions from the floor, as it were, so I think we should also figure out a way to get some of those questions in. So I'll just sort of take up 10 minutes with a few questions.
Wonderful.
And then
no, I
think
want
we
your
should
questions.
hand off. Well, yeah, no, I should, just to back up, I should say that Jillian and I actually met at an event for you know, the things we do in town here, for an event for Porsche cars. And I got chatting with Jillian and discovers that one of her skills is to, I guess, come up with car colors. And I was so interested by that. And because I really myself absolutely love color. And I've spent many, many years covering design and architecture, and went to architecture school. And I've always been really, really fascinated as to the difference in approach to color between the architecture profession and the interior design profession. I feel as if generally the architecture profession, for a bunch of reasons, tends to shy away from color or uses it in that Baragon way where color designates form, and interior designers appear, and I'm slightly generalizing, but in interior design you find more color used for emotion. And I just, as a first question to you, Jillian, because you've sort of worked in both camps, tell me, is that a fair perception, and why do you think that's come to pass? Why is there a kind of resistance to color and a real strong embrace of white, sort of within the more within the architecture profession?
I love this question. Okay, so a couple of things come to mind. I believe that, you know, as we know, I studied at Parsons, and we were taught the Bauhaus method of architecture. But I think more the latter part of the Bauhaus, when color was only introduced as materiality, it wasn't introduced as a pigment. And there was some sort of concept that color detracts from form. And I bought into that, you know, when I was at Parsons, and I loved every second of being there. And actually, when I came out of Parsons, I had 5 whites and a taupe. That was my range. Not just white, I liked photographer's white, which is that real blue white. And nobody could have talked me out of it for anything. So anyway, so flash forward, as I was studying color science and studying about Goethe and his very strong beliefs, one of the things that he believed is that color, white, was isolating. And I thought, what is he talking about? And I'd had an apartment at the time in New York, and I had a 25-foot length wall, and of course it was photographer's white. And after about 6 months of studying this, I thought, I'm going to try this. And I, like probably most of the audience, we use our homes as laboratories. And I was like, all right, I'm going to have that 25-foot wall painted taupe. That was I was going out on a limb. And it was painted taupe. And then one day I'm sitting on my sofa that was perpendicular to that taupe wall. And I'm sort of daydreaming or whatever it is I'm musing about. And all of a sudden I'm looking down at my body. and I realized that I'm leaning into the wall. And I just flashed a memory of when the wall was white, I was leaning away from that wall. And that's when I knew there was something to this. And one of the many things that Goethe taught was that our floors represent stability. So they should typically be the darkest surface in the room. Our walls are security. They're like a giant hug. So they should be a medium tone in the room. And then our ceiling, we can't really see all three planes in our cone of vision at the same time. The ceiling should just be reflective. So that's when I started, thinking there's something to this Goethe fellow. And then I just want to tag on to this, to my answer. Uh-oh, that's my doorbell. He's not going to go away, so I'll be right back.
Oh my goodness. Well, Frances, do you have anything to add to that?
Okay, thank you. All right.
Here she is.
Real life, and good thing I wore pants. Okay, so, yes, responding to your question. I about a year ago, I went to a presentation of one of the top renowned residential architects in the country. His work is just spectacular. And I noticed that all of his interiors were white. And so afterwards I went up to him and I told him what I did. And I said, all your interiors are white. And he just said, yes. I was like, okay, I'm gonna dig a little deeper. And I said, is there a reason why you don't use color? And he gave me the most honest, candid answer that I did not expect. And he said, I don't understand color, so therefore I ignore it.
Huh.
And that really, really resonated with me. And I believe there's some truth to that with others.
Okay, that's really, really interesting that he said that. And actually, I'm going to take the liberty of asking you one of the questions that was actually posed by one of the audience members, who's my good friend Sandra Cully. I saw her question. Sandra, I hope you don't mind me asking it for you. And it feeds right into what you've just said, Jillian, which is, what about cultural approaches to color? As in, what if you grow up in a community, a town, a culture, a place where there's a lot of color, or vice versa, not so? Does that impact you as much as, say, this inherited attitude to color that you say is in the DNA?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. Often what that has to do with is the amount of sunlight you have where you are. So that's why when you see countries that are closer to the equator, they have a lot more color because they have a lot more sun. And if you took those colors and brought them up north, they would be too blinding. My very first project I did on my own when I went into opened up my own shop in 1997 was a project in Beaver Kill, New York, up in the mountains in the Adirondacks. And it was really just 3 hours north and west of Manhattan. And I'd culled 100 textiles because the house there were just posts. The house hadn't really been constructed yet. And I always go big. I love to go broad and then really distill down. And I found 100 textiles that I thought, these are perfect. And I brought them up there. Again, this is 3 hours north and west. And only 10 of those colors worked, specifically because of the sunlight. And that's one of the reasons when you find a color that you love, or you paint a space a color that you absolutely love, it doesn't mean you're going to love that somewhere else, because it's all about the lighting conditions.
So Jillian, super interesting. And absolutely, yeah, growing up in the Northern Hemisphere, one does tend to go for those softer colors if you're going to have colors at all. so another audience member asked a really interesting question about the color palette that you learned in design school. You were talking about your Boston project and capturing the colors of nature on the walls, and then the water in between. And she asked about the notion of a color that represents natural. And at her design school, she was taught that the only color that really equated to natural was beige.
Was what? I'm sorry?
Beige.
Oh, beige. I thought you said age.
Yes.
I was like, wait, what? Okay.
No, beige.
Okay.
So for you, obviously, natural colors are far more than just beige.
Is that a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. The short answer is yes. And really, it's unfair in some ways to the word just went out of my head. The colors of nature, and the reason why they're as successful and fantastic as they are is because they're through light. They're not a pigment. So the hardest thing to do, and this was a real challenge on the Boston Convention Center, one of the hardest things to do is to capture the experience of something in nature that you see through light and create it as a pigment or a textile or a carpet. That is not easy. And, you know, beige, I'm gonna I don't know if I can say, I'm going to take a risk. You know, one of the things I collect aside from rainbows and color wheels is color quotes. And one of my favorite all-time color quotes is from Sex and the City. And it's from Mr. Big. And he said, beige is bullshit. So I think the reason he said that was because it doesn't have a position. And whatever we're doing in our field, it better have a position, whether it's your position or your client's position or the intended position or a culmination of that. You need to have a position.
Right. Okay. So so I know one interior designer who uses a lot of yellow. Okay, and she will say everybody loves yellow. Yellow's the color of sunshine. It's happy. It's upbeat. I know another interior designer who literally says, if I see yellow, it makes me suicidal. Like, he cannot stand yellow. So you were saying that your challenge as a designer is to make a humane space, a space that really can work for a lot of people. That say that room where you're going to take notes in a conference hall, you've got to find a color range that kind of works for the majority, I guess, that's somewhat democratic. But when something even like yellow can actually be so polarizing, how do you do that?
I love this question. I think most colors are polarizing. And for the sheer fact, it's our temperament. So your friend who loves yellow, she needs a lot of stimuli in order to feel calm, and probably can't understand why someone would want to be in a softer tone space. But that's about her responses. That's all about her primal responses. You know, the interesting thing, one of my main professors, Frank Monca, and my mentor, he specialized in creating solariums and mental institutes in Europe. He was a German architect as well as a color scientist, and he was based in Switzerland. And so a lot of his work was done in Switzerland and Germany and France. And one of the things that he was able to show us is that color is really contingent on your state of mind. So for example, and you know, don't quote me here, but different maladies, different illnesses like manic depressives and schizophrenics, they each need very specific colors to feel calm. Otherwise, they're agitated. So that's the extreme. I'm going to go back to your friend with the yellow and the non-yellow. I just lost my train of thought. Oh, the yellow, the friend who said that it makes her suicidal. that's closer to where I live. Not that yellow makes me feel suicidal, but I was a very sick childhood and I was a very sick child and was hospitalized, you know, I would say half of my childhood. And so it was not a happy-go-lucky little time. And I did not like yellow at all. I disliked it so much that I thought it should be eliminated from the color wheel. But that had everything to do with my state of mind. And now, while I like yellow, it's not a go-to for me, but it doesn't raise those issues for me because I'm in a different state.
Huh. Well, first of all, Jillian, I'm so sorry that you suffered like that as a child. How very difficult. And I'm glad that you've grown up and you're healthy and well, and you've come to like yellow. Were there any other colors? Since though you bring up this amount of time that you spent in the hospital environment, are there colors that were part of that experience that now you would really keep away from because they bring back those memories?
Well, I hope I have evolved enough to be able to tease those things apart, but it is a good question. And I know that certainly in the age that I was in hospitals and up until not that long ago, hospitals were green. Remember that hospital green? And what's really interesting about that, and a lot of sort of the color myths and the ways people have used color, they're all like any myth, it's based on something. So there's a couple things. Green, but only the green in nature, not pigment green. The greens in nature I'm not sure, the only colors that when we look at them, our iris doesn't have to dilate to see. So it's actually ergonomically calming more than it is emotionally calming. Again, and what they were doing in hospitals, they were trying to take that, you know, the natural color, which of course is filled with light, and apply it to a pigment. Another really interesting thing about green is that a medium tone green as a surface will help if we're working with our hands in any way, whether it's, you know, on an assembly line in an automotive plant, or whether it's a sewing room. Green as a background for your table surface allows you to focus more on your hands. So I'm sure when you went to architecture school, like I did in design school, remember when our drafting boards were green? That's why. No one ever told us that's why, but that's why. And I used to think, what a terrible color for a board. Why would they do that? But that was the premise behind it.
That's interesting.
So
That's interesting.
I don't want to interrupt too much, but we should get to some of these other questions. But Frances, definitely stay here to help move along these questions. So there was a good one from a little while ago from Zachary Moore. And this one I like to have people join in the conversation. So Zachary, if you want to address your question to the group, you can unmute yourself if you're still with us.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. Hi.
Yes.
Hi.
No, I'll sit up a little bit too. I'm kind of slouching. It's been a long day. So my question was, when we take natural elements and then we change the color of them, how do people perceive that? And what are your sort of opinions on falsifying natural elements with non-natural pigments?
Well, I think was my challenge, and what I did with the Boston Convention Center was to take those natural colors and do my best to create them into, I guess not so much pigment, because we really created it in textiles and carpet. And on that project, I had to design 80,000 yards of carpet. And again, I wanted it to be really textural. I wanted all those high lows so that you get the shadows. And that's one of the ways of mimicking nature, is to make sure that you're building in those shadows. So if there's positive and negative, and so there's some kind of rhythm that you've created that's other than pigment.
Interesting. So we have a lot of chatting going on, which is really great and actually new for our,
Okay, great.
but not too many questions. But if anybody wants to raise your hand, if I missed you within this chatter, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, please do. We would really love to hear from you.
Hi, it's Barbara Lazaroff. Zachary, it's interesting. I think, by the way, wonderful presentation. Beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm a designer, but I'm also a restaurateur.
Oh, wonderful.
A painter and a gardener. So I think it's interesting. I think within the hands of a great master like a David Hockney, for instance, you can go and see the bigger picture over at the Royal Academy when it was shown a few years ago. And you can see a sky that's many colors, which is what happens to the sky, but you also see grounding that is purple and logs that are colors that you wouldn't expect. So I think it can work. I think it's problematic when people don't have a complete handle on it. But what we've been chatting about is the fact that I was originally a biochem major. I was going to be a physician, but also research physician. So I took something called the visual array, where we studied the eyes and we studied color and we studied how color affects the body, the galvanic skin response, respiration, pulse rate, which is why, as I said, as a restaurateur, I didn't paint my restaurant red, but some of my restaurants were, my cafes were lots of tiles, very explosive color. Some of the other restaurants, the fine dinings, are more refined. Presently, even Spago that I own, I don't like that it's white and beige and whatever. It was originally had a lot more color in it. I think that color affects, people drink more when you have certain colors. They feel comfortable in certain rooms. As I said earlier, I love purple, but I don't think, it's my favorite color, but I don't think I'd want to sleep in a room with a purple wall. Some people might. My entertainment space would be different than my sleeping space. So I think it's interesting that somebody who loves color and understands it as much as you do, really began loving a certain array of whites or beiges or whatever. And with some of my clients, it's very difficult to move them from that. And I have a partner who is a guy, my partner John, and I'm going to end this now. He's a product designer, excellent at it. And I've had this ongoing argument with him for a few years, saying that women see, I told him, I see color better than you do. He goes, no, I don't. I've designed packages and everything for 30 years. I go, no, this is not the same blue as that blue, and this is a different green. And the last thing is, when men have sex changes, one of the things they've commented on is because of the infusion of progesterone and other female hormones, they see color differently. They see
Isn't
it
that
vibrant.
fascinating?
Wow.
I love that.
Yes. Proof, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Not just the X chromosome, but actually the influx of female hormones.
That's fabulous. Well, it's in the gene.
yeah. Yeah.
So we have, Summer has a question here. Summer, if you want to unmute yourself, or just like to hear more examples of what color influence behaviors.
Yeah, I thought that was a good point that the last speaker brought up about color influencing people's drinking behavior. So I thought I'd love to hear more about examples of which colors can influence which behaviors.
Oh,
again?
Red does. Red does.
What Jillian, can you hear Jillian?
Yes.
But what color, how colors influence behavior, and which, more examples, can you give more examples of colors that influence certain behaviors?
Well, you know, I get asked questions like this all the time, and given that we are individuals, that we don't have the same responses to color, so that yes, there are people that are going to be stimulated by red, but stimulated how? You know, not everyone's stimulated in the same way. Some people will be stimulated by red by increasing their appetite or their sexuality. Others can be stimulated but with red that engage anger. So it's really based on the individual. So when I work with, when I have a, you know, I work in a lot of different ways. One is with private clients, and some are with developers, and some are within a team of architects. But when I work with private clients, it's specifically about them and how they're going to respond. And even often I'll do couples, you know, and I've created a methodology, a play methodology to help people tell me how they feel. I don't tell them. So when I work with couples, I'll give each couple their own color wordplay, because it's fascinating how they're not, maybe there'll be one or two things that are the same, but they're not the same. So color is as individual as we are.
We have a raised hand from Luciana. Luciana, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. So my question, I'm not sharing. Let me share my image.
Hi.
Hello. So no, I think this is a very interesting discussion. So I have a question as a designer, because it sounds like there are so many variables from this equation, right? So if I'm working for an office, that happened before, that as a designer was working for that office, right? We know we have to respond to a certain signature that it's coming from that office, right? So I'm from South America, I'm from Brazil. So I think talking about the hemisphere and how we are exposed to light and color. So I'm definitely a very colorful person, and I do like color. But then working for designers or architects, right, where that's not, or they have a certain material palette or color palette that they are wanna work with, right? So I remember kind of showing ideas that were blocked right away because that's not the language of the office, right? So, and then I remember working in New York versus LA, and also a different intention in terms of working with color, depending on the client, and talking about, okay, so if you're designing a project to LA, you cannot expect that it's going to be the same color palette as a project in New York. So I kind of wonder, when working with color, right, and trying to respond to all those variables, how to create a kind of a hierarchy in terms of understanding what should I respond to, right? Because using my idea of how to work with, I might not be responding to any of those variables, right? So, or if there is something that I should be respecting first, probably the client might be something that we definitely should be looking at, but as a designer, there's also kind of an approach, a personal approach that I want to give as an idea to that client that might be opening his or her mind in terms of how to use color. And I just wonder if there is something that we should, some certain kind of criteria that we should follow through.
Great question. I don't know that I have a finite answer for you, but I think that whenever you have more than one professional working on a project, it's about connection. It's about understanding where one another is and what the reasons are. Because people have color palettes established for a million reasons. And it's important to know what those are. And maybe those color palettes that have been established are serving their vision and creating humane environments. And maybe they're not. But first, you can't come into any situation really and say, oh, I think it should be X. I think it's really a conversation, it's connection, it's connecting with one another to see where are you coming from. And if one is hiring the other, the one who's being hired, it's their role to find out where the person who's hiring them is. That's part of what they're hiring you for. And to sort of start teasing apart what the criteria is long before you ever get to color. So there's a lot of analysis that goes on. There's a lot of understanding that goes on. And the actual selection of the color palette is the last step, not the first step. I hope I answered that for you.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you.
Well, we have 2 questions that are left here, and then we have to wrap it up. It's already almost 6 o'clock, and I want to be aware of everyone's time.
6:30.
Yeah. So we have a question from Annie Chu about scientific research resources that you know of, and then I'll let you decide which one you want to focus on. And then one from Ann Zimmerman that you can see here.
I'm going to answer Ann Zimmerman. Scientifically, isn't it really critical to separate pigment from light and color? Absolutely. So that's why, as I just mentioned a moment ago, color is the last step of the process. First, you have to fully understand the intention of the space and understand, programmatically, like, what is the space, how many people are going to be in there, what is the outcome you're looking for, do you want to be impacting your brand in that? There's a lot of considerations to have that conversation and then start doing some kind of testing and analysis long before you get to the issue of having to separate color, pigment, and light, which you do, but it's closer to the end of the process.
That sounds good. It's always a little awkward ending these Zoom
one
presentations. Did you see another question that you wanted to address?
I want to touch on Annie Chu.
Mm-hmm.
And she asked, can you share some scientific research resources you know of? There does not seem to be a good clearinghouse for research. Hardest thing to do is to find evidence-based research. Yes, there is. That is true. None of this information is online. They're all the information comes through paid research groups, whether they're universities or libraries. This is not something you're going to find easily. And can I screen share again? I'm just going to show. I'd like to show you the books that I started with. Let's see here. So these are the 4 Bibles, in my opinion. One is Goethe, who I touched on about. Then one of the people that took his work to the next level was Faber-Beeren. And he was considered, I don't know, he was considered a colorist. He didn't really have a scientific title, but he ended up really sort of identifying how we respond and also to be creating humane environments. So that's a really good book. And then the other 2 books you see here are both written by my mentor, Frank Monka, and it really sort of talks about some of the fundamental aspects that I've addressed today. I studied the color sciences a little over 12 years ago. And so ever since that, I have been doing continual research, and I have a research section of my business where we're always delving into that information. But that's something that's part of how we work, and not something that we share openly.
Great. And one of the audience members just mentioned Joseph Albers.
Yes, and Albers is brilliant, as is Kandinsky, as is, you know, there's a lot of people. But what they're talking about particularly are, I don't want to say objects because it's not objects, but they're not specifically addressing the built environment. So that's part of what the issue is. We have a lot of information on color. And then we have people, geniuses like James Turrell, who uses colored light, which is fabulous. But that's not a space you can stay in for very long. You couldn't live in a James Turrell installation. You could go there and you could love it and, you know, dream about it, but you couldn't live in it. So really what we're doing here is all about health and wellness and creating humane environments in which we can function, live, and love our lives.